talk here from walking Wacky Way. This is part of the bypass, but this is just like an overpass from this roundabout. Roundabout is a common thing that they used to have here in Kenya. A lot more roundabouts because like street lights don't really work in most places. Even if they're up, they don't really work. But here they do. Today there's like some police helping get people get that way. But this is one of the thoroughfares. James Gashuru Road goes that way, and then Red Hill Link road is that way. So you have some people kind of crossing from that side of Nairobi into like Lavington side that way, and then like Westlands and Central Business District is that way, and then Kangemi and whatnot is that way. But the main point of this one was just a little bit about like Kenya, about Nairobi, about developing countries and other things, about like how there's cultural sharing and whatnot. I had a recent video talking about, I posted this up there, and I was talking about what happens with like education, with schooling. What is it that is like, okay, this is the colonials came in and the colonialism came in and did this XY negative thing to Kenya. But then what are the positive things? And necessarily, what does it happen with like the whole just situation with appropriation? I think living is appropriating. You can see right there, that's a cultural thing that has come from there. Not just KFC itself, but even Valentine's Day and things like that. That's a generally positive thing, right? But then for some people, they're like, oh no, that's breaking the African mores of having arranged marriages and like dating and things like that. That's not something in there. Is it? Or is that a positive thing that you can bring? And then the main thing is just this one right here, with the church needs reformation, not revival, by Apostle Takim, contending earnestly for the faith that was once and all delivered to the saints. Jude chapter 1 verse 3. I'm gonna pause and then do like a voiceover for all the things that are on that list there, because there is this aspect. So I'm going to read through the dangerous deliverance practices to avoid that Apostle Takim, not Pastor, Apostle Takim can help you with. So sex with preachers or witch doctors. So this is a common thing, I think, everywhere. Well, not the witch doctors part, but people in power using their position of power and status to get sexual favors. That's a common thing. I'm actually listening to this series, Starship Commander or something series. Let me double check. It's the Starship Fleet Commander series by Erki Jir. Pretty good series. It has a character who is from this alien sort of sect, kind of like the Jedi, but more proactive. And he goes into his old talks of what he does with his transcendent kind of mindset of maximizing peace, like active peace following, active good following, and that also involves just not having any sexual interest despite his power, and having a few characters already approach the character, and so far that hasn't actually like succumbed to it. I wonder if there's something that's going to change eventually in this story. But okay, so back to this. That happens in the States, that happens in Europe, that happens in the past, that happens in the present, that will keep happening in the future. One thing that doesn't necessarily happen as much in the past, although you talk about the science, some people who you might know who I'm kind of talking about, and there's also other things of homeopathy, which some people might actually think that's a thing that works. But there's might be some witch doctory type stuff that happens in the West that is not necessarily called witch doctors. But here you will still see actual witch doctors being advertised on places that come to me as a positive thing, not as a thing to be like looked down upon. Okay, so that's there. So dangerous deliverance practices to avoid: feet washing and use of salt in prayer. Now this one I don't know. Again, I don't know necessarily what sect or denomination this person is. And I think I was saying above something about Reformation from revival. I don't know if it was revival or liberation theology that had the Pope. I said that, I might have said that before, I might be saying that after later on. But I don't know if it's the revival church, so I don't know necessarily what that is. But I think the feet washing thing, I remember the previous Pope had the thing where he was washing the feet of some some refugees or migrants into Europe or into Italy in specific. You remember washing the feet of them, and that brought some furor. Furor, is it furor or uproar? Furor, I think, in the Catholic circles. But then there's also a reason that he's definitely not Catholic. I can tell this apostle of all things, he's definitely not Catholic. It's a thing where the Protestants came in. The primary church that came to Kenya was the Anglicans, which makes sense because it was a British colony. but there's a lot of these other ones. And then, since colonial times, there has been now just new ones that started, as I mentioned in the Kakamega video. You can check that out for the Kakamega on religion, and you can check that out. And there's also like places where it's just literally this one small shack, corrugated metal shack somewhere, has a denomination that just started by itself and has its own actual flock, parish or congregation. Yeah, congregation, that's the word. And it has its congregation that go there, and that person who's leading it has developed their own form of Christianity. That's something they have there. Yeah, use of salt in prayer. I don't know that the salt. I have never actually heard of that with my background, having been raised in the Christian ways. Both my parents are still Christian. They go to an Anglican church from that St. Mark's. I don't know. Anyway, okay. So use of oil in prayer. This is another thing where I think it's like the healing oils, but then now there's like the different oils. I think some homeopathy has some oil type stuff where the oils kind of heal you in different ways. So I don't know if that's a dangerous deliverance practice or way, or it's like, okay, we gotta do that. Initiation by Holy Communion. Now, this one, I don't know if that would go into like they don't give Holy Communion. And this one, like the eating the blood and the body of Christ. Now, that is some cannibalistic type stuff. But then it's like different because in Christ, in God's, you weren't, in certain other religions, it wasn't so much of you it was more sacrificing humans and other earthly beings, bodies to the gods. But one thing that kind of flipped that around was it was okay. Now it's the stand-in of Jesus Christ's body and blood being given to the humans, to the mortals. But that is, but now is that like a thing where because there's a mortal body that's there? Are you saying the Christ body? I don't know. So there is that whole aspect in there. So maybe in his whole understanding of it, that's not something. Use of water in prayer. Now this one, I'm again, I don't know what exactly that would be against it. It's now this baptism. Is there no baptism in his denominations? I'm sure there's baptismal prayers and ceremonies when that happens. I was actually baptized. I think I was baptized in St. Mark's Church here in Kenya. Or I might have been baptized at the Bethesda Presbyterian. I'm not quite sure. It's been a long time. I'm an old man now. Okay, so raising of altars of sacrifice. Okay, we skipped one. Sowing of the seeds of deliverance. Sowing of seed for deliverance. Now, is this crops? Uh, Sowing of seed. Now, is this seed like sex with preachers? Is it talking about that kind of seed? Slang the dong for deliverance? I don't know. Or is it just actual sowing seeds, like planting stuff and saying that's like gonna help me? I don't know what's there, but raising of altars for sacrifice. Yeah, that one in most of these mainstreamish type things, sacrifice. You will still find some places maybe that would have some of these things, but I don't think the ones that are tied into Christianity still have like the sacrificing of animals, or let alone the human animals, because humans are animals. There's none of that actually being done anywhere that I've heard of. There's still occasionally you will have some cultish type of things where there was recently a story about I had it on my blog, rented on. Maybe I'll put a link somewhere, but on my Restaurant blog, I covered a few years ago. There was a massive cult with the sacrifices, Jonestown type thing. I think it was about 100 and something people took their lives at the guidance of someone. So that's raising an altar of sacrifice. If you have that kind of thing, you get people in that mentality. It might come to the point of sacrificing yourself. And even in this book of Arkajir, the Starship Commander thing, the guy talks about a cool thing where he's like, okay, executions are banned, talking about executions completely, and then there's also corpses that meat from animals. No, he's none of that. But he was talking about sacrifice in specific, which was a kind of interesting thing that the person wrote, where it's like sacrifice is more of like it's an attack on yourself somehow. So that is not something that was allowed in his in his movement to get maximum peace. I might be butchering how it's actually explained, but then somebody asked him, okay, what's the difference with, like, let's say there's you have a destroyer or like a bigger ship, like the capital ship where the leader is. Some missiles are firing it, and then you jump across with your smaller ship and you take the missiles instead. It's like, is that some sort of sacrifice? Is that negative? Is that not allowed? And he's like, no, that's not sacrifice, because your intention, like if you actually took those missiles to you and you got hit by the missiles and your ship didn't blow up and you didn't like end your life doing that, would you detonate your ship after surviving the hits of the missile? I'd be like, no, your action intent was to prevent further damage to your capital ship or your bigger ships, with the hope that their capital ships or bigger ships, more of the people can survive, and then that ship can able to destroy the enemy right after or in the future. So that's not necessarily I am just ending my life in some sort of way. So that was kind of a cool, interesting thing how he looked at that, like sacrifice being a negative thing. So that would have kind of said, I'm already the way I'm saying this one. You could probably read this. You could probably read this series that I'm talking about, the Starship Fleet Commander, and probably, in my estimation, learn as much about human morality and guidance and stuff from Pastor Takim or Apostle Takim. This is kind of what I'm thinking. I don't know, but I could be wrong with that. Okay, so paying for counseling sessions. Now, this one, I think there is now a kind of battle between the more actual thing, and this is another thing that I think is a positive thing that's raising here in Kenya, is a lot more of these counseling, mental health type services, and people thinking about things like that. And I think that's a positive thing coming up. But I think now there's a battle between the church used to be the kind of place. I mean, of course, there was something else going on in Kenya. That's the thing. I'm going to go research and start seeing what were the ways people would deal with some of these things before the colonials came and for the colonial times. I want to get more of an understanding of those, try to get the stories from the older people in the villages and just people who were in touch with those people, because those generations are dying and they're dying off with those stories. So back to this counseling, there's an increase of counseling services and therapy and just secular versions of it where it's not necessarily tied to the churches, but churches themselves now are also offering that within the churches that's tied to it. But even when you go outside of that, most of them are religious themselves. And even some who are religious will ask you, do you want it to be tied in with religion or not? And the service is kind of different, of course, if you say you don't want religion tied into whatever it is that you are receiving in counseling. So there's a combat of that because they're kind of using the same sort of people. If somebody goes to counseling, maybe they won't be as active in their church. And if somebody is, yeah, so that might be a thing that's also involved there. Now, using money to silence so-called altars. Now, okay, raising of altars for sacrifice. Okay, so the sacrifice altars are bad, but so-called altars, so might be some other altars. But if it's so-called altar, if it's not an altar and it's being put on as an altar, then using money somehow to silence it would be bad. How? I don't know, but like I said, this is a faith-based thing. It's coming from a different mindset. Maybe some of y'all out there who might read this stuff might understand it more, where they're coming from. I don't necessarily get that one. Going to a mountain to pray. Now, is this, you coming at Moses? Are you coming at my boy Moses? He can't go to the mountain and get the prayers out there and the Ten Commandments. So I don't know if they follow the Ten Commandments now. They're following the Bible here. They have from Ecclesiastes here. And then they had Jude up there. But I don't know. Is that not really discussed? So, okay, so dangerous deliverance practice of what? Now, he's an apostle. So he's a direct follower. So can he, as an apostle, be called to go to a mountain to pray? But if there's like a trip of people saying, let's go to a mountain to pray, that is something else because that's not there. Now, dangerous deliverance practice. So maybe this is like specifically for whatever deliverance is in his denomination, in his understanding there. Now, fasting without walking in the spirit. This one, I need to get my obese self back to like the shape that I was actually working well in my fitness journey, fit awareness, getting back to that. And intermittent fasting was one of the things, other sorts of fasting, one of the things. For various reasons, I've done multiple day fasts. My first longest fast, I think I've done it. I did it again a few years ago, but the first time I was in college and I didn't have my food card. The card wasn't loaded and didn't have money, didn't have anything. So for some time, I stayed up for like 3 days straight in this time, and then also did eat for 5 days. And I remember the first thing I ate after that was a tangerine, and you could feel it like coursing into your body. Like it was insane, the feeling of just that. And most people in the world haven't actually felt like most people in the West have never actually truly been hungry. Like you can be like starving, where it's like your body's starting to eat away at like your vital organs and the things that are functioning and things are shutting down. That hardly ever happens. But I don't necessarily think it's a bad state to be in, to get to a situation where your body is functioning and actually eating the calories. Like, of course, if you're obese, it's just simply, if you're putting on weight, it's simply the fact that you are ingesting more calories than you're spending. So your body is going to switch those extra calories into stores of fat. That is just the basics of it. You can just eat chocolate. If you're only eating just chocolate boxes, but you're eating 2,000 calories of chocolate, the same milk chocolate is plain itself, and then you work out 2,100 calories a day, you will not put on weight. It's just not possible to do it. So fasting in general has a lot of benefits. I don't know why here you have to do it walking within the spirit, but I think you have to be aware of what you're doing in that kind of sense. Yes, it can do things to your biological system, to your what's the word I'm trying to look at? Digestive system and your thing where you burn the things, and sometimes it goes off if you have mistreated in certain ways. You're not burning as actively as you were when you're younger. I'm trying to think of the term of the thing, can't really think of it right now. But I highly suggest people should try fasting. If you've never been to a situation where you're like, oh, like people say, oh, I'm starving, what? Oh, I'm hungry. Most cases, many people who I hear say that have never actually had that feeling. And it's something where if you're doing it in some sort of control, it might be something interesting to just test and see how you feel with it, how you look at the world, how you sense your body and understand certain things and don't take certain things for granted. I think it's a positive thing with or without the spirit, but there is some spiritual connotation to fasting in a lot of different faiths and understandings, and I can understand why. So I don't understand why it's dangerous here. And then using padlocks, photos, and handkerchiefs and prayers. What? What? Hey, no, that's what I don't even know. Padlocks. I don't even know this. Okay, running after prophets for prophecy. So this, of course, now they tour. This might be literally running after them. It could also just be literal following them around different places. But these people do build up a massive following where they travel around Africa and they have these kind of concert site venues where it's just massive people just coming in. So I think it's kind of avoiding that sort of worship, that sort of worshiping of them as celebrities in that kind of sense. And I think that's a positive thing to not do, not follow them in that kind of sense. Praying with soil or loaves of bread. Again, now maybe this is he's an apostle, so he talks to Jesus. I think it's Christian. So he can talk to Jesus. Jesus is the only guy who can do the loaves of bread thing. You can't. So praying with soil. I don't know. Like I remember, I still have some soil from I think my final game at like my high school football game and then like my college in West Virginia. I still have some soil from that. I don't pray on it, but I kind of keep it for some kind of sentimental value. So I don't know if that's a kind of thing that would also be dissuaded, but or specific praying with the soil in that kind of sense than every other charismatic insanity. Now, I think Apostle Takim would consider himself to be charismatic, but he's talking about you don't want other people's charismatic insanity. You just want I don't know if you'd call it charismatic, my confident sanity. That's what you'd want. My educated sanity, my informed sanity, my humble, honored, valued kind of sanity, something that he'd want you to come to. Okay, now back to the rest of the video. This is me after seeing the aspect of the list, but there's this thing that happens with developing countries, especially when you come to a place like Kenya, and then you say, okay, some people in the West, in developed countries, that where Christianity isn't as strong as it once was, we'll look at developing nations and say, oh, they're Christian, at least those people are Christian, but this is kind of part of the Christianity that maybe in some of the Baptist, more sort of churches you'd find something like this, but this is like an equivalent of like, he'll tour around. These people have tours where they have these massive tours that go around, like Joel Osteen type of revival churches. He's at Reformation, so it's not even revival. There's like revival theology in certain places. I think the previous Pope was a revival theologist first or something, but this is beyond revival. But I don't know. You can see it's on Google Play, Amazon, Apple apps, Roku, so you can watch these things and see them. And I think this was the same thing that church, even in Kakamega when I posted, I think they were on the same kind of network. But what is the positive stuff of bringing banking? Standard Chartered, that's a British bank. Bringing roads, this kind of technology, this is things that people do. Cars and whatnot, we don't need to develop our own cars. We can take that tech from somebody else. And then here you have the religion. It's tied in with different aspects of African and older traditional things like sex with preachers or witch doctors. I don't think that's something that's being worried too much about in the West. Then you have the food, things like that. So this is just a little bit of things I think about walking around and seeing as I travel around in different places. I'm going to finish my walk now.